Welcome to History with Tim. Today we embark on a deep dive into a pivotal chapter of Irish history, the Irish Civil War. This two-part series aims to unravel the complex layers of a conflict that not only reshaped the nation, but also reverberated through generations. In part one, the prelude to division, we're going to explore the turbulent events and the early stages of this devastating conflict from the ashes of the War of Independence, the fractures within the newly established Irish Free State. We'll delve into the motivations and the ideologies that drove a wedge between former allies. But before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work of Simon Whistler and his team over at Warographics. Their dedication to illuminating history through engaging narratives has inspired countless content creators, including myself. Their passion for storytelling and meticulous research serve as the foundation for our exploration today. With their influence in mind, let's honor the voices of those who lived through these tumultuous times and seek to understand the complex landscape that led to the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, the Civil War, and Simon's going to talk about it. Simon, for those of you that don't know Simon Whistler runs Today I Learned, Warographics, the Average Criminologist, I believe it's called. He runs a lot of history-oriented YouTube channels. He is an Englishman that lives in the Czech Republic. He is right up there with Chris from Vlogging Through History. These are guys that inspired me to get started, and I love his content. I actually used to just sit during my breaks at work and listen to both of them. And Simon is really great at what he does, and I'm really happy that I've joined the same community as him. But we're going to be discussing the Irish Civil War. And again, he's going to be discussing it, but I'm just going to give you a quick what brought us to the Irish Civil War. So pretty much the past few days we were doing reactions to the Irish Easter Rising of 1916 with extra history. Today we're going to be doing Warographics Irish Civil War. It's going to be split into two parts. But in this, what the Irish Civil War is, so after the Easter Rising, War of Independence breaks up from pretty much 1917 until 1922. In 1922, Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, and another group of Irish dignitaries, they go to London. And while they're in London, they negotiate with the British government of Lloyd George. And part of that crew is actually a young Winston Churchill. This is obviously after the Gallipoli catastrophe and things like that. But because of... Sorry, I have a really itchy nose. But because of all of that, because of his prominence, he's kept on with the Colonial Office, which technically Ireland is part of that department. So what ends up happening is in the eyes of the British, there is no way for full Irish independence and autonomy. But there is a stepstone. They keep 4 provinces. So in the United States, we have like New England region, we have like the South, things like that. In Ireland, there's 4 provinces. There's Leinster, Ulster, Munster, and Connacht. Leinster, Munster, and Connacht are the 3 provinces that the British say, those can be part of your free state. But Ulster, because Ulster is where most unionists, and unionists aren't like, in the United States, we think unionists, we think labor unions. No, unionists in Great Britain mean they want to stay in the United Kingdom. Ulster is mainly populated by a lot of Scots-Irish, Ulster-Irish, a lot of transplants from Scotland and England living in Ulster. So the British are like, this is going to stay part of England, and the rest of it is you. A lot of people think that Eamon de Valera, who at the time was representing the provisional government, he sent specific people over because he didn't want to be blamed for Ireland not only not being a free state, being a free country, but also losing the North. But as history has shown, this was probably the best deal the Irish were going to get. And this is what divides the Irish Republican Army right down the middle. But with all that said, join us as we unravel these events, the decisions, and the peoples whose lives were altered forever. So here's Simon, and we're going to do this like we usually do this. I'm going to pause it when I'm going to add anything on, and let's get into it.
It should have been a time of victory. By mid-1921, Irish forces had fought the overwhelming might of the British Empire to a standstill, facing down a better armed, better equipped army to claim control of their own turf. Beaten and humiliated, London had thrown in the towel, agreeing to a peace treaty that would make Ireland virtually independent.
Okay, we're going to start up early with this one. I wouldn't say beaten and humiliated. What it really was it was international pressure. I can recognize, as someone of Irish heritage, we do have the Irish have one of the greatest underdog stories of history. You know, there's a great Wolf Tone song called "You Can Never Beat the Irish," and it's true. The Irish, had the war continued, it would have continued. Like, the Irish would have continued. Look what's going on with the Troubles, and even now you see riots sometimes in Northern Ireland to this day. But the British were being beaten down by international pressure. You know, the United States, which had came in on England's side during the Great War, they're looking at what was going on, and they're like, you know, it's one thing to say you're dealing with terrorists. It's another when you have British soldiers gunning down old women leaving mass and things like that. So it was more a culmination of the casualties, and it was kind of just not worth it for the British. It got to that point. You know, a lot of people say that's also kind of what happened during the American Revolution. It just became not worth it. So what seemed easier was to come to a negotiated peace.
State for the first time in centuries. But instead of celebrations, Ireland began 1922 with a feeling of unbearable tension. Tension between those who supported the treaty and those who believed it didn't go far enough. Tensions that would soon explode into open conflict. Fought over 10 bitter months, the Irish Civil War was a brutal capstone to the independence story, an epilogue written in the blood of brothers. Taking place in both cities and open countryside, it pitted friends against neighbours, sons against fathers in a great fratricidal struggle. A struggle that would change Irish history. In this third part of our loose series on Irish independence, we're delving deep into the Civil War, a conflict that still scars Ireland to this very day. On July the 11th, 1921.
Real quick, too, I want to talk about something. You know, again, Simon does a great job, but kind of a simplified way to look at the Irish Civil War is the... I just wanted to make sure I got the director correct. Martin McDonagh, an Irish director, in 2022 made an independent movie starring Colin Farrell, Barry Connigan, and Brendan Gleeson, called The Banshees of Iniskerin. Now, it's kind of a dark comedy, but it's actually a it's a story of the Irish Civil War. So Iniskerin is an island off the coast of Ireland. They're Irish, and there's actually someone on the island. He's a new Garda. He's new Irish police, the New Republic Police. But the story is about these two men. You have Brendan Gleeson's character, who goes by the name of Colm Doherty, and you have Colin Farrell's character, who goes by the name of Padraig Schiavone. And what's going on is these two men are best friends. They've been best friends for their entire lives, but what you kind of have is Colin represents the Free State. Padraig is kind of the representation of the Free State. He's very positive. He's very, you know, you liked me yesterday. Like, he's very much more uplifting at the beginning, whereas Colm kind of represents the old IRA that feel betrayed. And, you know, at first it's kind of like Colm is being disinterested in Colin, but it's all overnight. Like, one night they're hanging out, having a good time, then the next day, you know, the great line from the movie is, "I just don't like you anymore." That's really what happened with the Irish Civil War. And, you know, there's parts in the movie where Padraig gets into issues and Colm reluctantly helps him because he's still his friend. He still cares about him. But it's a very beautiful explanation of the Irish Civil War, because the Irish Civil War is something Ireland does not like talking about, and justifiably so. In the United States, we look at our American Civil War as that was a pivotal moment for this country in the United States. The American Civil War, that's what made us decide. That's where we finally, we broke away the chains of slavery. We took a look inward and said, is this the kind of country we want to be? But the Irish Civil War, on the other hand, it was pretty much the Free State was saying, this is the best we're going to get right now. Please, let's just do this. We don't want any more bloodshed. And then the old IRA guys were like, no, this is not what we fought for. This is not what the people of 1916 died for. And the Banshees of Inisherin, I would 100% say go see it. It's a great indie movie. I would highly suggest go see it. But with that said, let's get back to this.
The Irish War of Independence ended its active phase not with a bang, but with the groans of bitterest exhaustion. After over 2 years of fighting, the British had to accept that they'd lost control of their colony, that the vicious tactics of their black and tans had succeeded only in uniting society against them. But even as it was slowly dawning on London that victory was impossible, the Irish Republicans were facing their own mounting problems. That spring, IRA Director of Intelligence Michael Collins had warned that they were running out of ammo.
Yeah, so right there, I mentioned that a few videos ago. Michael Collins wasn't actually in charge of the IRA as a whole. That fell under the control of Cathal Brugh. But the thing was, as the head of intelligence, he was the de facto leader of the Irish Republican Army. Sure, the Irish Provisional Government kind of made the calls and Michael Collins followed with it, but it really wasn't, he was the de facto leader of the IRA at the time. And, he was trying his best with everything going on. Again, Ireland was working off the good graces of donations of the upper class Irish. They were working off what was the United States bringing in to help them. They were not really in a place to lead this war, but Michael Collins made it work. He had to make a lot of IOUs, but he made it work. And, the church helped as well. But the war was getting very difficult to upkeep, but Simon will explain that.
In May, up to 80 of their volunteers have been captured in a single action. In short, both sides were like Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed at the end of Part 1. Nothing more than broken lumps, barely able to keep standing. And while, like Rocky, Ireland had won the moral and technical victory, neither side was in the mood for a sequel, hence the need for a peace treaty, one guaranteed to include painful compromises. That December, Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith headed the Irish delegation, with the British represented by Prime Minister David Lloyd George and Minister for War Winston Churchill. Since the Brits had basically lost, the key outcome was guaranteed, that Ireland would cease to be a part of the United Kingdom.
And again, that could be seen as a mischaracterization of the situation. Simon's very good. He's very moderate on most things, but I do think that's much like calling the Irish Free Staters they wanted to stay in the Commonwealth. That wasn't true. But I think it's a little unfair to say the British had lost. It was more just the British couldn't risk what could be the reaction. Think about something like Croke Park, the horrifying images of British soldiers locking Irish citizens in a stadium and just shooting at them for an afternoon. That does not look good. Just look at what happened in India with the massacre at Maharajin. That was just as bad. The British Army had very strong hand ways of dealing with things, but the rest of the world was like, you can't do this to people that are literally not doing anything.
And gain a measure of independence. But within that simple-sounding guarantee lay a series of nasty compromises, as unwelcome as a bear trap in a souffle. Compromise 1 was that there would be no Ireland consisting of all 32 counties. Instead, Protestant-majority Ulster would remain in the UK as a separate entity, its exact shape to be decided by a boundary commission. Number 2 was that London refused to give Dublin full independence. The best Lloyd George and Churchill would offer was Dominion status within the British Empire. Now, in practice, that meant a lot of freedom, equivalent to that of Canada or Australia. But it also meant a British Governor-General with broad powers who'd take up residence in Ireland. Worst of all, it meant public servants being forced to continue pledging allegiance to the king. Now, if you're struggling to understand how repugnant that was, imagine for a second that the American Revolution had ended with a treaty requiring all future presidents to personally kiss the king's rectum. That
Simon's always very colorful with the way he explains things. But yeah, Ireland, so to speak, became a Commonwealth country. They were independent. They had their own government. It's just they still technically answered to the king. And it was actually through a technicality in the abdication. Ironically, when Edward VII abdicates from the monarchy, that's actually where Ireland makes its official declaration of freedom, because there's a loophole in the proclamation that says we swore allegiance to the direct lineage of the monarchy. Edward resigning, we are no longer endowed with that, which is ironic because George VI, Bertie as he was known, he was actually very pro Irish independence, much like his father. But the issue was, it was that loophole that actually finally gave Irish independence, and that's where Ireland will actually become finally a free and independent republic, which it's only about maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years from when the Free State Treaty is ratified.
bile rising in your throat? Well, that is what the oath did to every Irishman. But Collins and Griffith had no choice. 2,000 were dead and Ireland was scarred. So they simply held their noses, puckered their lips, and did what had to be done. Starting on the 14th of December, the Dáil, or Irish Parliament, opens its multi-week debate on the Compromise Treaty, one marked by remarkable anger and ill will on all sides. In one corner stood Michael Collins, arguing that this treaty was basically the best they were going to get. It gives us freedom, he memorably declared. Not the ultimate freedom that all nations desire and develop to, but the freedom to achieve it. In the other corner, though, Dáil President Eamon de Valera was having none of it. From his perspective, the treaty went beyond what Collins had been authorised to negotiate.
De Valera is a very fascinating character. You know, Michael Collins, he's born in Cork, a little outside Cork City, near a place called Ballina. It's also nearby where he'll be killed during the war, which Simon, I guarantee, will touch on in this video. He's very interesting. He's a gutter snipe, as he often referred to himself. He was born to multiple sisters. He had a single brother, Sean Collins, and he did everything in his power during the earliest pictures we have of him is him during the Easter Rising. He, when he's a boy, moves to London, which is a very common thing, actually, back then. A lot of young Irish boys would move to England to get jobs there because there were no jobs in Ireland. You know, there's a line in an Irish folk song that says, our greatest export were people. But he'll go back to Ireland during the Easter Rising, and then after the Easter Rising, where De Valera actually will choose him to be part of this new provisional government as the Director of Intelligence, Secretary of Intelligence, he will make himself an anomaly. No one will actually know what Michael Collins looks like. The pictures they use for him are pictures of him when he's 17 years old. So he gets older, he grows facial hair, and he does everything in his power to make sure no one knows who he is. He would do things like walk up to Dublin Castle in front of all the soldiers and detectives and everything and joke around with them just to get a feel of what they were like so he could understand them. Michael Collins was probably one of the most fascinating characters, and honestly, I'm going to do a biography about him because I'm a big Michael Collins fan. He also, following the death, which again, I think he'll mention in this, when Arthur Griffith, who becomes the first president of the Free State, unfortunately passes away, Collins kind of becomes the president de facto. He becomes the premier of Ireland, and he'll stay premier until his death, where another member of Fianna Fáil, which is a branch broken off from Sinn Féin, will take over. And De Valera, though, De Valera is actually from New York. He was born in New York. His mother is Spanish, his father's Irish, and he will move back to Ireland to support the cause, and he'll be at St. Stephen's Green during the Easter Rising. Now, I'm not going to besmirch his name. There's a lot of reasons people aren't big fans of Eamon de Valera. For one, he kind of painted himself as a hero of 1916, where he looked down the barrel of the guns. He tried to make it out of the executioners. Meanwhile, there were reports that he threw up, when he found out he wasn't going to be shot, and he kind of cried and bellowed. Which, again, it's not an insult. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying situation, which makes the other men that did get executed or face the firing squads that much more braver that they didn't do it. But any normal person would have that kind of reaction. De Valera was a politician of the politicians. He knew the games. He knew how to work the systems. And his biggest flaw, I think, is that he kind of out-politicked himself, and that's what will lead to the Irish Civil War. But something a lot of people have issues with De Valera about is in April of 1945, he actually will be the only country, the Republic of Ireland, unfortunately, will be the only country to reach out to the German government and express condolences for the death of their leader. Eamon de Valera did that. And a lot of people think he did that in spite of Churchill, but at the same time, it's kind of that idea of read the room. Come on. Especially because Ireland actually, during World War II, took in a lot of Jewish people to protect them, so it was even a little more insulting to the people that were in Ireland.
They needed to go back and squeeze further autonomy out of London, by force if necessary. Yet, for all de Valera's anger, he couldn't match war hero Collins's charisma. On January the 7th, the Dáil narrowly voted to accept the treaty. But while his supporters might have preferred to focus on the victory part, the key word was narrowly. In the 124-seat Dáil, only 64 voted for it, while 3 abstained and...
This is important, because what ends up happening is De Valera doesn't want to look bad. That's why he sent Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith to do this. He doesn't want to look bad. But by this vote, what he pretty much says, and I'm going to quote the Michael Collins movies, what De Valera says in it, because it's very close to what he really said. He said, "The Irish people proclaim the Republic. It can only be unproclaimed by the Irish people." And this makes a situation that they put it to a national vote. All of Ireland has to vote on the treaty, either pro-treaty or anti-treaty. Now, this is where you have kind of the Cold War of the Irish Civil War start, because you're going to have Arthur Griffith and Michael Collins campaigning for the treaty, and Eamon de Valera and Cathal Brugha and Liam Lynch campaigning against the treaty.
57 voted against, hardly an overwhelming mandate. When the results were announced, de Valera resigned his post in disgust. He declared the Dáil was breaking its oath, that becoming a dominion of kingly butt-kissers would mean killing the Republic that they'd all sworn to defend. That same month he left Dublin to whip up popular anger against the treaty. Sadly for the war-weary populace, he'd succeed beyond his wildest dreams. As Collins and Griffith remained in Dublin to head a provisional government tasked with drafting a constitution, de Valera embarked on a selective speaking tour. Selective because by now most of Ireland was fed up with war, especially in the east and north. The imperfect treaty and the peace that accompanied it was popular. But in the west and south, where the fighting had been fiercest, anger at British atrocities still smouldered like resentful coals. And de Valera was an expert at fanning flames. In graphic speeches, the former Dáil president darkly threatened civil war, declaring the IRA...
See, and this is his miscalculation here, because a way to describe the South and West is kind of, let's put this into the American Civil War perspective. The South and West of Ireland is like the South of the United States. It's large. There's a lot of land. It's not that big a population, though. Like, they have Cork City, they have Kerry, they have all these cities. It's not that big, though. Like, yeah, you have the cities here. But in the east and north, you have Mayo, you have Athenry, you have Dublin, you have these big metropolises. So if this is going to go out, and even Ulster, because Ulster, this is what we forget, Ulster gets the vote on this too. You have Belfast, you have Derry, you have these large cities in the north and east, and in the south and west, you have a few, but there's more in the north and east. And this is kind of the same mistake of the American Civil War. He thinks because these are bigger regions that when the inevitable happens, and right here he was about to say it, would have to wade through the blood of the soldiers of the Irish government. His mentality is if we control more territory, we'll win. But he's being very short-sighted because at the same time, the Irish government, it's part of the Commonwealth now, technically. They're going to be supported by who? The British government. So what's going to happen is the British are going to arm, train, and even assist in the field these guys. A lot of the British soldiers that were stationed in Ireland, instead of returning to England, joined the Free State Army.
Would have to wade through the blood of the soldiers of the Irish government, and perhaps through some members of the Irish government, to get their freedom. To Michael Collins, such threats initially sounded laughable. After all, he was a powerful figure in the IRA and a hero of the War of Independence, the guy that everyone respected. Rather than enemies, he envisaged the IRA becoming the backbone of Ireland's new national army, which just goes to show how utterly out of touch Collins had become. Of the Irish Republican Army's 115,000 members, roughly 75% found the treaty's terms about as appealing as a dirty weekend with Nigel Farage. Now, this might have been okay if the IRA had operated like a highly centralized national army, but it didn't. Instead, regional commanders financed and ran their own units as they saw fit. IRA-wide policy outside of wartime was decided at conventions of senior commanders. So when
this is actually a part of the way they end up being able to fight such a good war. They were called flying columns. Pretty much what it was you would have a town, let's say you had 100 guys, 100 people in this town. 30 of them, that's a column. What they would do is they would hide in the hills and they would ambush and attack British and RIC, Royal Irish Constabulary. On the march, they would attack them just good enough that they wouldn't know who they were, and then they would disappear into the hills and bogs, and they would just reassimilate back into the population. It was a genius strategy, and Collins was the one behind it. I'm going to reference the movie a lot, but I think Neil Jordan did a good job. There's a scene where they're saying how Eamon de Valera wants to meet Michael Collins in Cork, and they say, well, they're going to kill him in Cork, and they say, well, he trained all of them. You think they're going to kill him? And he's like, well, yeah. But that's something, the flying columns were a big thing, but that's also why you will see a lot of English soldiers joining the Free State Army, because like he said, 75% of the IRA did not like the treaty, which understandably so.
When Collins returned from London, waving a treaty he had negotiated without any input from these commanders, it pissed off pretty much everybody. That March, a convention was called to discuss the treaty. Aware of how destabilising a split could be, the Provisional Government's Defence Minister, Richard Mulcahy, attempted to ban it. To which the IRA basically responded, just try and
Mulcahy will actually be Michael Collins' successor as commander of the Irish Free State Army after Collins is killed. I think he'll end out the war.
Stop us, that. Held on March the 26th, the convention drew representatives from all but 21 of the IRA's 73 brigades, boycotted only by those most loyal to Collins. Fortunately, the assembled anti-treaty forces failed to reach an agreement, with some advocating a return to war, some the installation of a military dictatorship, and some merely a renegotiated treaty. Yet while no immediate rebellion broke out, the provisional government would have been idiots not to see the growing threat. Across early 1922, the British government would...
Well, and this is another thing you just heard there. The IRA brought up the idea of a dictatorship by the military. Think about what's going on in the 1920s across Europe. Think about what just happened in Russia. It was the military at the end of the day who took over Russia. Mussolini, in this decade, is going to march on Rome and seize Italy for the fascist party. All these far-right groups are taking over based on military support. 1923. What's going on in Germany? A young Austrian is rising through the ranks of a nationalist party. Around the world, people are watching this happen. In Spain, the Civil War is about to break out, the Spanish Civil War. Again, another nationalist is going to rise to power. This is a very tumultuous period. This is the world is looking, and they're like, are we going to see a dictator? Are we going to see Eamon de Valera at the head of these columns? Or are we going to see Michael Collins at the head of these columns? This is actually very important because now England has to be a little more productive because, yeah, Germany, Russia, Italy, Spain, they're threats. This is across the Irish Sea. This is technically still English territory until this treaty is signed. So this is very, very dangerous timing. And this is what the IRA, at the end of the day, yeah, their system was perfect for fighting a war. But when it comes to actually governing and trying to figure things out, there's going to be factionalism.
Was evacuating all of its remaining units from Ireland. Where the British state vanished, the IRA took over. The entire provinces and especially rural areas had no authority except their local IRA commander. And as their power grew, so did their appetite for confrontation. As Eamon de Valera crossed the nation speaking out against the provisional government, gangs of anti-treaty IRA began occupying the abandoned British outposts. In Limerick, anti-treaty forces got into a standoff with fighters loyal to Collins over who would take over the barracks. In Kilkenny, hundreds of IRA took over the town centre. But by far the most serious occupation took place in Dublin. On April the 16th, anti-treaty leader Rory O'Connor led 200 men to seize the four courts, creating a Republican.
Now, Rory was actually a very big Michael Collins ally. So what I'm actually going to do, because I don't like these videos going longer than 40 minutes, we're going to finish this part about Rory, and I'm actually going to split this into 3 parts. But Rory was actually someone who Michael Collins had personally trained, and he would go on to train other flying columns on how to fight the war. Rory doing this is a big step because now Michael Collins is seeing these men that were his allies are turning on him. And he now has to face the reality that armed conflict will happen.
Fortress at the heart of the provincial government's power base. Around this same time, the IRA began raiding arms caches and banks, acting for all the world like they were equipping themselves for another war. Yet even at this stage, there was still hope that conflict could be avoided. With elections scheduled for June, Collins reached out to de Valera with an offer. Instead of standing...
The biggest mistake he made was thinking that these people were going to be diverted. At the end of the day, Eamon de Valera may have been seen as the political leader. These columns were going to fight regardless. They were not going to accept whatever terms the Crown gave that was anything short than full Irish unity and independence.
Against one another. Why didn't the pro and anti-treaty politicians all stand as Sinn Féin candidates? That way, they could iron out their differences afterwards in a coalition government rather than now, while the atmosphere was so febrile. It probably also helped that the draft constitution was still being written, that Collins had openly ordered its writers to produce a document as democratic, as Irish, and as removed from British desires as humanly possible. Produce a radical enough document, the feeling seemed to be, and it almost didn't matter what the treaty itself said. Unfortunately, the Irish weren't the only ones waiting on the new constitution. Over in London, the Brits were likewise looking out for the results, and if they didn't like what they saw, they still had one trick up their tea-stained sleeves. They could threaten Ireland with war.
I keep doing that. We're going to stop it there for right now. Yeah, so, you know, where we are at this point, we're pretty much in the prelude stage of all of this. You have this situation where the flying columns are going to do whatever they want. Rory taking over the four courts, Rory O'Connor taking over the four courts, the British are looking at that. And they're like, and they're looking at Michael Collins specifically, and they're saying, what are you going to do about this? Because that is a government district. For those of you that don't know, the four courts is the head of the Irish judiciary, and before Ireland became an independent country, it was the chief office of the British judiciary in Ireland. So you now have this situation where the treaty is not signed yet, but you have IRA men garrisoning government buildings. And you have the British government looking at this and saying, why are they not being removed? Why do you not have control of your own soldiers? Because again, you know, let's use what they were saying. These are the soldiers that beat them. Why can't you control your own men? Because the reason they beat them is because they really didn't control them. The individual commandants were in charge of their columns. But with that said, I'm going to tie this up for now. So we will see the next episode tomorrow. Like I said, we're going to keep going until my trip to Ireland. But thank you so much for joining me, friends. If you enjoy the content and want to see more of it, please think about joining our Patreon. We got 5 levels of membership. We got the private tier. We got the sergeant tier. We have the captain tier, the colonel tier. And if you want to be on my staff, the marshal tier. Please join our Patreon to get cool exclusive content. Also, if you are a big fan of the national parks across not even just the United States, but even places like Ireland and France and all these other countries that also have national parks that need help, please think about donating to our History with Tim's National Parks Preservation Fund. We greatly appreciate the help. Please like, share, and comment. And if you enjoyed the video and you're a returning friend, please hit that red button that says subscribe and hit the bell so you can make sure you're notified whenever we have new videos up. Thank you so much for joining us today, friends, and we will see you in the next one.